Hello, Fiendlings, how the hell are you? Well, PT for my shoulder continues, and let me tell you, those sadists can really beat you up. Fortunately, a little Tylenol, ice, and rest are working. No idea how much longer I'll be in there, but it's only twice a week for now. I'm making progress. I very much considered splitting this episode into two pieces, but decided I'd rather be a cliffhanger and bastard in one go. I hope you enjoy. Be safe, have a great week, and we'll talk again soon. Here's episode 5 of The Black, Oceania. Chapter 7. Kojo stayed at his station while Sarah and the other animals suited up. The moment Rags finished, she flipped off Alan and went overboard, leaving him rolling his eyes as he readied his mask and rebreather. Sarah grinned and asked Alan, "Something she always does? Ritual?" Hippie pointed at Alan, wagging a long, scarred finger. "Rags blames Alan for the tattoo on the back of her left calf." Sarah blinked twice as she processed what he'd said. What does a tattoo have to do with flipping over the side of a boat?" Alan blushed. He said quietly, "It's not a tattoo." "Then what is it?" Hippie snorted. "A souvenir from a munition that went off when she was too close to it." "Oh," Sarah said. "Made a mistake?" Alan shook his head, his teeth grinding a bit. "Story for another time," he said, and fitted his mask and rebreather. Hippie winked at Sarah and did the same. Not quite understanding what just happened, she followed their example. Her atypical diving mask allowed her to talk, and the eye portions of the mask were separate from the scuba rebreather. She'd never seen one like this, and now that she wore it, she wasn't sure she liked it. A central widthwise band across her head gently clamped down near her left ear. As soon as it did, something like a sound entered her consciousness. It was odd.
"Test, test, test,"
a voice said from her left ear, the words slightly distorted as if coming through a damaged speaker. Alan was speaking, although she couldn't hear his voice so much as feel it. Then she understood. The band sent signals through the skull and directly into the cochlea without ever entering the ear canal. The auditory nerve, a little confused but adaptable, made sense of the sound, providing comms without earplugs or headphones. At the same time, the vibration didn't interfere at all with the clarity of the wind around her, the waves lapping gently at the side of the Zode, or Kojo clicking his tongue in a mysterious rhythm. I hear you," she said.
"Good. Mic check, animals."
Each team member sounded off. When Rags signaled her affirmative while beneath the water's surface, her voice was no more distorted than Alan's. Satisfied, Alan pointed at Hippie. The braided man sat on the gunwale for a moment, made sure his rifle was secure, and fell backward into the water, one hand holding the mask in place. "Kojo?" Alan said. The man raised a thumbs up. "I've got the scanner running. Anyone so much as farts near a phone or radio, I'll smell it," Kojo said gravely. Sarah chuckled. "As long as they don't catch you whiffing him," Alan said. Kojo saluted and turned back to the console. "Ready?" Alan asked Sarah. "Yes," she said, although she wasn't really. She was amongst professionals and felt like a goddamn student. Rags and Hippie are already on the bottom, performing a quick clear. Once you're in the water, look directly down and you'll find them. Take your time getting to them. No rush. Plenty of daylight. Yep, he thought she was nothing more than a student, and although she didn't want to admit it, he was more or less correct. Fuck. Sarah nodded. "Got it," she said. Alan grinned. "Over you go." Before she could protest, he gently pushed her over the platform. Sarah didn't fight it, choosing instead to roll with her momentum. She brought one of her hands to the mask as quickly as possible to keep it firmly attached. She struck the water with her ass and immediately flipped over. Bubbles flitted past the crystal-clear view before the water cleared. Alan had been right. Hippie and Rags were in a squad-clearing position, although they were missing a third to complete the triangle. Sarah realized that was her job and descended.
"Sarah, all clear?"
Alan asked. "Affirmative," she said. "Got Hippie and Rags in sight."
"I'll follow shortly. Out."
A school of fish swam below her, their zigzag motions increasing rapidly as she approached. By the time she occupied the water they resided, the school had already darted several meters away. Sarah grinned. Kojo had anchored at the beginnings of what had been the village proper. Chunks of concrete and asphalt, probably the foundations for a few permanent buildings or makeshift roads, littered the whitish sand. Patches of new coral had already attached themselves to the surfaces, but they looked ill and barely clinging to life. Fish, on the other hand, had transformed the remains into their domain. Even from a distance, she could see them traveling through glassless window frames and shattered doorways.
Watch yourself,
Hippie said. Sarah tore away from the sight and focused on the ocean floor. That was a warning about the patch of fire coral she was heading directly into. Thanks, Sarah said with a blush. Hippie didn't respond, and she wasn't sure if that was a good sign. Well, you're doing great, she thought to herself. You forgot to mention something during the briefing, and now you've proven that you can't keep your head in the game. 2 strikes. Don't swing next time without hitting the fucking wall. Sarah continued downward but adjusted her angle. A few moments later, she flipped again and stood awkwardly on the sandy, off-white ocean floor. After unslinging the bolt rifle, a clumsy process with all her gear, she ensured the safety was off and completed the triangle. Each squad member faced a different direction, creating a wide field of fire. A triangle could easily adjust if one end was pressed and the others left unmolested. Clear of significant obstacles, the area provided no cover. Where Rags and Hippie stood must have once been the shore. Apart from a backstop, they were completely exposed, and she didn't like it. If them two were here, wouldn't they make a nice snack? She glanced down at her right arm and saw the reassuring sight of sunlight. There's sunlight on the ocean floor, you idiot, she told herself. It couldn't survive out here for long. Unless it's quite large, she heard Hollingsworth say in her head. God, that man's voice had grated on her. He'd been the dreamer on the Miskatonic project, putting forth the crazier theories, some of which she was beginning to believe had been dead on. She wondered if Moore had been in contact with him yet, maybe trying to convince him to return to the project. After all that had happened, his mangled hand, the terrible PTSD he'd suffered, and the fact he barely escaped yet again, she doubted he'd come back under any circumstances. The same went for Kate, the former de facto head of the Miskatonic science team. As far as Sarah knew, they were either already in Colorado or packing their belongings to move there and join Kate's daughter. No, Moore wouldn't be able to get either of them back. No way. That was for idiots like her and Givens if he were still alive. That thought hurt, the wound still fresh, and she knew she should let it go, but her subconscious kept picking at the scab before it could barely form. Just get to acceptance already, she said to herself. You don't have time for the other shit. The sound of something striking the surface hit her ears, and she quickly glanced up. Alan had entered the water, a shroud of bubbles surrounding him before rising and leaving him in the clear.
Okay, animals,
Alan said over the comms as he swam down to join them.
Are we clear? Except for inside the buildings,
Rags said.
We haven't moved from our posts. Copy,
Alan said.
Hippie, Rags, clear the closest structure. I believe that's the Welcome Center. Sarah, you're with me.
She opened her mouth to protest and stopped. Alan's in charge, she reminded herself. Whatever he does, he has a good reason for doing it. Remember that. Make sure you pay attention to cracks and crevices, Sarah said. The sun might be up, but it can hide in the shade.
Thanks for the tip,
Hippie said. The pair took up a staggered formation and half swam, half walked to the vicinity of a small building that couldn't have stood more than 4 meters high before the village had fallen into the sea. Now it leaned to one side like that Italian tower used to before it sank into the earth. The top portion of what she assumed had been a wooden building with a steel frame rested against a cliff wall that rose 4 meters from the ocean floor.
Remember, you have UV flashlights,
Alan said.
Check your entire hemisphere before entering. Copy,
Hippie and Rags said at once. Sarah wanted to know what he meant by hemisphere but didn't want to ask over the team comms. Any questions she had would have to wait.
Hippie,
Rags said over the comms.
Clear that doorway. Copy.
The veneer of sarcasm that usually lay behind Hippie's every word had dissipated. He was all business now. Rags stood a few meters from the doorway and off to one side, her weapon unslung and pointed at the ocean floor. Hippie had made his way to the front entrance's threshold. He peered around the corner and into the darkened building, ambient light barely providing any illumination because of the cliff the Welcome Center leaned against. Hippie's non-UV flashlight, set to a wide focus, banished the deepest shadows while creating new ones. Sarah held her breath as the large man entered the building. His silhouette, visible against the darkness, disappeared to one side as Rags moved to the doorway's corner, rifle held at the ready.
Wow,
Hippie said.
Our fishy friends didn't waste any time setting up shop. We're clear as far as I can tell. We're moving up,
Alan said and motioned to Sarah.
Let's go take a look.
Without waiting for her, he kicked and quickly swam forward. Sarah followed, but maintained a distance of 2 meters from his wake. The closer they came to the building, the more she realized that what she'd mistaken for natural rock formations were chunks of shattered concrete the ocean creatures were attempting to reclaim. As with the other reefs she'd seen, the coral looked ill. Whatever was in the water here was slowly killing them, or maybe it was the warming of the water. Perhaps something else? No, idiot, it's not M2 doing it, she told herself. Not unless the creature's been here for decades. Colorful hermit crabs skittered across the whitish ocean floor, and the occasional fish swam by, seemingly unperturbed by the humans invading their crystal-clear world. Sarah's eyes continued to stray from the building in front of her, what she was supposed to be watching, and to the beautifully colored fish and crustaceans. She practically shook her head, trying to regain focus as Alan landed at the doorway and took position next to Rags. Sarah lagged further behind than she liked, but Alan didn't even turn to watch her progress. Maybe he was giving her time to get used to the water. She hoped that was the reason. When she reached the door frame, she took position opposite Rags and Alan. He nodded to her.
Ready to go in?
Yes, Sarah said. Following you.
Copy,
Alan said, smoothly kicked his legs and entered the building. Feeling like a toddler trying to keep up with a pro athlete, she slowly entered the darkened structure, her heart thumping faster than it had any right to. There had been no reason to be concerned, though. The shattered remains of tables, chairs, and what might once have been a refreshment counter lay strewn across the fractured foundation. The wood had rotted away in several places, exposing rusted metal supports. Barnacles and other crustaceans she didn't recognize had made the structure their home, and from the fish she saw wandering in and out of the gaps in the building's walls, it had already become part of the biome. Hippie stood at the far end of the building, his rifle cradled loosely in his hands, but his head constantly swiveled as he checked for threats.
Sarah, see anything? Well, give her a second,
Alan said.
She just got here.
Okay, she thought. You're on. Instead of replying, she moved further inside the ruins, her eyes drinking in everything from the crumbled concrete slabs to the rotting wood and other debris. She saw no signs of the creature. If M2 had been in here, portions of the structure would look as though they'd been professionally cleaned. The rest, for instance, would have been removed as though it were nothing more than a stain. M2 might not have bothered with the wood, but even the concrete would have been affected, appearing white and clean instead of gray and grimy. That's no guarantee it wasn't here, though, she thought. If it had consumed enough material to grow a shell, the creature might not have bothered touching anything apart from feeding on unlucky life forms. She didn't know shit about fish, but she didn't think they'd still be flitting in and out of here as though it were a brothel if there was a dangerous organism inside. Then again, she didn't know shit about fish. Sarah grinned for a moment before it disappeared into a frown of stress. The animals wanted her expertise. Hell, needed it. But she'd no fucking idea what M2 would look like in the ocean, and the idea she'd have a clue how the biome would react to its presence was a joke. I don't see any sign, Sarah said, but that doesn't mean it wasn't here.
Afraid you were going to say that,
Hippie said. Alan pointed at the walls.
Nothing there? Nothing out of the ordinary?
What's ordinary? She thought, but didn't say. The piece of land the building had been on top of had more or less fallen into the ocean. How the hell would she know what to expect? If M2 had been here in liquid form, it would have cleaned the concrete and the metal, assuming it touched them, that is. But everything here looks, well, normal, I guess? Alan made a sound that the bone conduction receiver didn't translate well. It might have been a sigh or a chuckle, but she wasn't sure which.
About as I expected,
Alan said. His head moved as if he were taking in the entire building again, studying it, looking for something she might have missed.
Didn't know what to expect, mind you, but I didn't think we'd find anything in here. Rags? Go,
she said.
We're coming back out. Copy. You're clear.
Alan gestured to Hippie and Sarah.
Let's swim to the big building and see if we find anything there.
What's the big building? Sarah asked.
The church,
Hippie said.
Or what's left of it.
Alan nodded.
Closer to the shoreline. Better chance they hid something in there.
Better chance it's hiding in there, she thought but didn't say. Hippie nonchalantly kicked and made his way back to the entrance. Alan made a "you first" gesture, and Sarah followed the long-haired man, still feeling like a novice with her relatively clumsy kicks and movements. She needed to get better at this, and she needed to do it fast. Chapter 8. The church wasn't far, which was a good thing. It gave the animals less of a chance to realize how shit she was at this. Sarah felt as though she were being judged on every kick and every hand movement. The struggle was beyond maddening for someone athletic, nimble, and dexterous. They have years, probably decades of experience, she reminded herself. You've only been a tourist, and that was years and years ago. True, but it didn't matter. She felt as useless as most of the animals' embedded external resources had reportedly been. Quit it, she thought, and continued following Alan as he approached the church. Keep your head. The remains of another building blocked their view of Rags and Hippie approaching from the other side. The metal building had maybe once been a small warehouse or tourist trap, but now it was little more than twisted metal with disintegrating wooden walls. As with the Welcome Center, fish moved freely through the ruins, completely unperturbed by the animals' human presence. It was as if the fish knew that this was their world and that the humans were nothing more than moving obstacles. In a way, it reassured her. If the fish weren't on alert for a predator, maybe there was nothing to be afraid of here. Maybe.
Alan?
Hippie called out. Alan stopped kicking, turned, and tread water. Sarah followed suit.
Go. Got something strange over here. Trails on the sand. Trails.
He turned so he could see Sarah and provide cover.
Explain? Need to see it,
Rag said. The church was no more than 10 meters from them now. The structure rose from the sand, its tall roof and steeple piercing the ocean surface into the bright sunlight.
Okay,
Alan said, gesturing to Sarah.
On our way.
He kicked past the small building's remains, and Sarah followed as he turned the corner. An asteroid belt of scattered debris marred the whitish sand with broken glass, concrete, fractured and splintered wood, and garbage. An old refrigerator lay partly submerged in the sand, its ancient door slightly ajar. Sarah eyed it cautiously, half expecting it to pop open and them two to jump out like a jack-in-the-box. Rags and Hippie tread water a few meters apart, their underwater rifles pointing at something in the sand. Although their masks covered their faces, their body language said the same thing. Be alert. At least Sarah didn't have to worry about them taking her seriously. Even after the briefing, she wasn't sure they completely believed her. Maybe they still didn't, but they were professionals. That would have to be enough. She and Alan approached the pair slowly, Sarah's rifle clutched a little too tightly in her hands. Calm. You won't be good to anyone if you get spooked. Alan came to a halt 3 meters away from the spot Hippie and Rags pointed out with their rifles. Sarah reached him and stopped, her eyes fixed on strange marks in the sand. A long, twisting, snake-like trail flowed from a hole in the ocean floor toward the church. The trail, mostly uniform in diameter, protruded from the sand like a partially buried cable. Whatever had made the trail must have been at least 200 centimeters in diameter. The trail wound around larger pieces of debris rather than going beneath them. Sarah imagined that if she floated above it, it would look like a long, thick snake whose head rested inside the church. Alan said.
Sarah?
She shook her head. Are there any indigenous creatures that do that? The animals fell silent for a moment. Hippie finally said,
Have to ask Kojo, but nothing I know travels like that. Not that big anyway. Almost looks like a worm,
Rag said.
Fucking big worm,
Alan said. He turned slightly to face the large building. The church's partially open double doors, one dangling by a single hinge, offered a narrow view into the building beyond. That slit might as well have been a window into an abyss.
Pretty dark in there,
Alan said.
UV flashlights?
Yeah, Sarah said. I think we assume something's in there. Rags made a sound that might have been a chuckle or a short bark of laughter, but the comms didn't translate it well enough for her auditory nerve to tell.
Could just fire some WP in there and find out. Waste of ammo, and not going to help us find the boat,
Alan said.
Hippie, Rags, scout the west wall and see if there's any windows, a way for us to see inside. Copy,
Rags said. The pair started to move. Wait, Sarah said. If there were any holes, we'd see some ambient light inside, wouldn't we? For a moment, Alan said nothing, his feet lazily kicking to keep him above the ocean floor. Sarah could practically hear the man thinking.
We would. Check anyway,
he said.
Just make sure you use the UV lights.
Hippie and Rags immediately swam toward the left side of the church. Alan glanced at Sarah.
Come on, we're going to get a little closer.
He started to move and stopped before pulling his UV flashlight.
Guess we need these too.
Sarah didn't think the lights would do much good from this range, but if the creature came at them from inside the church, it would hit the sunlight and fry. Only if it doesn't have a shell, Hollingsworth said in her mind. God damn that man, but his paranoia had certainly left an imprint on her. The wariness seemed more than justified as she looked at the gaping darkness through the damaged doors. She followed Alan but stayed 2 meters behind him and to his right. He moved easily through the water, rifle pointing ahead like he was walking instead of swimming. The man made it look so easy. She wasn't sure she could fire her weapon and hit anything while moving. He, on the other hand, was probably dead accurate even underwater. God, she hated being a noob. He positioned himself 4 or 5 meters from the doorway, his light pointed at the door but not on. Because of the sun's position, the church cast a shadow over the area. Stay out of the shadows, Sarah said. Alan tilted his head downward before moving back another meter.
Hear that, animals? Copy,
Rags and Hippie said.
Thanks,
Alan said, pointing at the entrance with his rifle still aimed into the darkness.
How do we approach it?
Sarah mentally shrugged. UV lights on full power, phosphorus rounds at the ready, and head on a swivel. Alan chuckled.
Ask a stupid question.
Not stupid, Sarah said, but going alone is asking for trouble. If it gets you isolated, I can all but guarantee it will attack.
Good to know. Buddy system.
Buddy system, Sarah agreed. Never go alone.
No open windows,
Rags reported.
Got a concrete slab on this side blocking the west wall. No way in. What about the rear?
Alan asked.
No dice,
Hippie said.
The church backs up against the portion of the island that hasn't sunk. Great,
Alan said, peering to the east and above the surface. Sarah followed his gaze and saw the 2 meters of earth rising above the ocean and the broad limbs of trees hanging over the water. East, Sarah said. More sunlight? Alan nodded.
Animals, hold position. Sarah and I will check east. Copy,
the pair said. Alan's eyes lingered over the entrance even as he swam to the building's corner. Rather than hugging it and peering around it like he would if expecting an armed assailant, he continued swimming, giving himself more than a meter of space. Smart, she thought. If M2 had been waiting around that corner, it would have attacked before he'd even had a chance to realize it was there. She hoped it wasn't smart enough yet to lay ambushes. Hope and luck, a fallback of fools. He gestured to her and Sarah kicked until she was less than a meter behind and beside him. The eastern wall had no perforations or noticeable damage. The building might as well have been magically transported into the water, or constructed here. The clapboard windows hung at odd angles, but barnacles and other animals had already colonized the wood, preventing sunlight from entering.
We got closed windows on the east wall,
Alan said.
Animals, cover the egress and give yourself plenty of space. Copy.
Gooseflesh covered Sarah's skin. We're going to pop the windows?
I am,
Alan said.
You provide cover.
Sarah thought about that for a moment before shaking her head. Let me open the windows. He turned his head as if to look at her, although she still treaded water behind him.
Why?
You're a better shot, have more maneuverability, and are more likely to react fast enough if something happens. I'm the noob, remember? He was quiet for a moment.
Copy,
he finally said, and kicked until he was halfway down the wall and catty-cornered to the nearest window.
Open it from further down. Don't look in. Just get the shutter off, and make bloody sure you get me a line of fire.
Noob, not stupid, she wanted to say, but instead of speaking, she kicked past him, a cloud of fine sand following in her wake. She moved northward until she was on the other side of the window. The sand beneath her looked relatively undisturbed. Whatever had made those marks hadn't bothered making them on this side. Why? Once afternoon came, the sun would be baking the other side of the church, making this the best ingress-egress. But as she moved to the wall, the sand swirling about her flippers, she saw why. Concrete. This side of the church still had an intact slab. While the other must have buckled during whatever quake had caused Urakukur to fall into the water, it hadn't damaged this side as much. 3 egresses out of the way, she thought. It couldn't move through the rear of the church because of the shore, and it couldn't go east or west because of the concrete slabs. That left the creature only a single way in and out of its lair. You're assuming it's in there, a voice said in her mind. That was laughable. The trail in the sand wasn't made by any creature they'd known of. Considering the animals were subsurface combat and demolition experts, they would have seen something like that before, or at least heard of it. Wouldn't they? Sarah's nerves hummed like power lines in a high wind. Before she reached the window itself, she jittered with an adrenaline rush. She imagined prying off the wooden clapboard window only to have a tentacle grab her and pull her inside. Sarah unsheathed her diving knife and pried away the layer of barnacles and other fauna that had filled the gaps. Each swipe revealed more damaged wood beneath and the tiny gap between the ill-fitting shutter and the interior beyond. Once she had enough of the crap removed to get a good hold, she put her fingers into the gap. She glanced back at Alan for reassurance. His UV flashlight glowed, although she couldn't see the light itself. Alan nodded to her. He was ready. Sarah returned the nod, took a deep breath through gritted teeth, and pulled. The wood resisted, and she put both hands on the shutter, pressed her heels against the wall, and pulled as hard as she could. The wood split in her hands as she shot backward from the wall, leaving her holding a jagged half of the shutter. Sunlight flowed in through the open half of the window, the remains of the shutter still blocking part of her view. Sarah tossed the piece of wood to the ocean floor, unslung her rifle, and quickly aimed at the partially open space. The view didn't offer much detail, but the sun, still low on the eastern horizon, cast a brilliant ray of blessed light that shattered the darkness beyond. Through the window, she saw the debris of what looked like broken pews and a few waterlogged books scattered across the floor.
Can't see much,
Alan said. Sarah shook her head. Have to knock out more shutter.
Not sure about that. You're going to have to get right up next to that window to really see inside.
A shiver raced down her back, the wetsuit suddenly feeling like a frigid blanket. She slung her rifle, grasped the UV flashlight with one hand, and put her diver's light in the other. After ensuring both were on, she swam back slowly to the window, the lights thrust before her.
Wait,
Alan said.
What are you?
It was too late, though. She knew she'd lose her nerve if she didn't move now. Alan was still talking, but to Sarah, his voice emanated from a different universe. The only reality she knew now was the slant of sunlight illuminating the narrow view through the window, a diver's light beam dancing across the far wall, the far clean wall, and the sudden sense of doom. She waited for something to come at her, a tentacle to come ripping through the broken shutter, wrap around her neck, and pull her screaming into the darkness. It didn't happen. After pausing a beat, Sarah moved a little closer, her head practically where the shutter should be. She aimed the conventional floodlight lower to illuminate the shadowy floor just beyond the sun's reach, the light's reflection bouncing back at her from impossibly clean concrete. Fuck, Sarah whispered. She trained the light further in, eradicating the shadows covering the other pews, the fragments of wood, and something that once upon a time might have been a chair. Now it was little more than a pile of shining, broken metal.
Is it?
Before he could finish the sentence, she'd come back to herself. It's either in there or it was.
Animals?
Alan called out.
Shine your lights and get ready for action. Consider it to be inside.
Hippie and Rags both said copy in reserved, calm voices. Sarah had been amazed she could even speak. Then again, she was the one at the window, risking the creature leaping out and snatching her face. The church's floor had caved in during the collapse, leaving only the cracked concrete slab. Sand had been tracked inside, but mostly pushed to the church's walls, moved not by the tide, but by something big. Taking the rest of the shutter, she said, dropping the diver's beam. The black cylinder fell until the lanyard around her forearm left it dangling in space. She kept the UV light shining into the room beyond while she pried out the shutter's remains. She saw a flash of light out of the corner of her eye and froze. The light then moved, and another joined it. Hippie and Rags were shining their diver's floods into the room. The shutter came free in a cloud of sand, crumbling wood, and broken barnacle shells. Sarah immediately floated backward from the window, her free hand grasping her rifle. Alan held his UV light beneath the barrel of his AR, and she suddenly wondered why they hadn't just detached the damn things to begin with. Something to consider for their next dive, if there was one. For a moment, neither Alan nor Sarah spoke. The swoosh of the ocean was the only noise. Sarah waited for something to happen, willed something to happen. Nothing did. The lights from the church entrance continued dancing across the floor and walls she could see through the open window.
Alan,
Hippie called out.
I see a lot of shiny concrete and broken furniture. Not much else.
Same, Sarah croaked and had to clear her throat. If it's in there, I don't think it's on the floor.
Shit. I don't see it on any of the walls, but the lights kind of peter out before they hit the back. Could be there in the shadows? Could be,
Ellen said. He made it sound like a gulp.
Sarah, could it be on the ceiling?
The question froze her brain for half a second. At Ben Taub, the creatures had been able to crawl walls, skitter down hallways, and tear through sheetrock like tissue paper. Fuck, it could, she said. She approached the window, rifle once more slung, each hand grasping a light. Hold position, Sarah said, her diver's floods shining a bright halo on the far wall. Less than half a meter from the window, she slowly panned the light down the wall.
What are you looking for?
After a moment, she saw it. The wooden wall looked different somehow. Her mind took longer to process it than she liked, but her nerve-addled brain finally pieced it together. It crawled up the wall, she said softly. Her light had found a thick trail, so dense that at first she thought it had just been part of the damage. The 1-meter-wide swath might as well have been a smear of strong wood stain applied with an enormous brush. She had to move closer to the window to see how far up the wall it went, but her view cut off before she could see the rafters. Silently cursing, she moved even closer, the diver's beam jiggling in her trembling hand. Something moved in the shadows above her light. Skin crawling with terror, she raised the diver's beam to the ceiling and froze as the light disappeared into rippling darkness. Sarah raised the UV light without thinking, and the church began to quake.